us and get a actual bill passed that allows for the kind of information sharing we need. Because you know, if we don't put in place the kind of architecture that can prevent these attacks from taking place, this is not just going to be affecting movies. This is going to be affecting our entire economy in ways that are extraordinarily significant. And by the way, I hear you're moving to Europe. Where are you going to be?
Brussels.
Brussels.
Yes. Helping Politico start a new publication.
Well, congratulations.
I've been covering you since the beginning, so.
Well, I think
It's been a long road.
I think there's no doubt that what Belgium needs is a version of Politico. Yeah, the waffles are delicious there, by the way. The Cheryl Bowen, you've been naughty. Cheryl, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Looking ahead to your work with Congress next year, you've mentioned as an area of possible compromise tax reform. And so I am wondering, do you see a Republican Congress as presenting a better opportunity for actually getting tax reform next year? Will you be putting out a new proposal? Are you willing to consider both individual and corporate side of the tax ledger there? And also, are you still concerned about corporate inversions?
I think an all-Democratic Congress would have provided an even better opportunity for tax reform. But I think talking to Speaker Boehner and Leader McConnell, that they are serious about wanting to get some things done. The tax area is one area where we can get things done. And I think in the coming weeks leading up to the State of the Union, there will be some conversations at the staff levels about what principles each side are looking at. I can tell you broadly what I'd like to see. I'd like to see more simplicity in the system. I'd like to see more fairness in the system. With respect to the corporate tax reform issue, we know that there are companies that are paying the full freight, 35% higher than just about any other company on earth if you're paying 35%. And then there are other companies that are paying zero because they've got better accountants or lawyers. That's not fair. There are companies that are parking money outside the country because of tax avoidance. We think that it's important that everybody pays something if, in fact, they are effectively headquartered in the United States. In terms of corporate inversion, those are situations where companies really are headquartered here, but on paper switch their headquarters to see if they can avoid paying their fair share of taxes. I think that needs to be fixed. So fairness, everybody paying their fair share, everybody taking responsibility, I think is going to be very important. Some of those principles, I've heard Republicans say they share. How we do that, the devil's in the details. And I'll be interested in seeing what they want to move forward. I'm going to make sure that we put forward some pretty specific proposals, building on what we've already put forward. One other element of this that I think is important is, and I've been on this hobby horse now for 6 years, bless you. We've got a lot of infrastructure we got to rebuild in this country if we're going to be competitive. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, electrical grids, water systems, sewage systems. We are way behind. And early on, we indicated that there is a way of us potentially doing corporate tax reform, lowering rates, eliminating loopholes so everybody's paying their fair share, and during that transition also providing a mechanism where we can get some infrastructure built. I'd like to see us work on that issue as well. Historically, obviously, infrastructure has not been a Democratic or a Republican issue, and I'd like to see if we can return to that tradition. Okay. Julie Pace.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask about Cuba. What would you say to dissidents or democracy advocates inside Cuba who fear that the policy changes you announced this week could give the Castro regime economic benefits without having to address human rights or their political system? When your administration was lifting sanctions on Myanmar, you sought commitments of reform. Why not do the same with Cuba? And if I could just follow up on North Korea, do you have any indication that North Korea was acting in conjunction with another country, perhaps China?
We've got no indication that North Korea was acting in conjunction with another country. With respect to Cuba, we are glad that the Cuban government has released slightly over 50 dissidents, that they're going to be allowing the International Committee of the Red Cross and the United Nations human rights agencies to operate more freely inside of Cuba and monitor what is taking place. I share the concerns of dissidents there and human rights activists that this is still a regime that represses its people. And as I said when I made the announcement, I don't anticipate overnight changes. But what I know deep in my bones is that if you've done the same thing for 50 years and nothing's changed, you should try something different if you want a different outcome. And this gives us an opportunity for a different outcome, because suddenly Cuba is open to the world in ways that it has not been before. It's open to Americans traveling there in ways that it hasn't been before. It's open to church groups visiting their fellow believers inside of Cuba in ways they haven't been before. It offers the prospect of telecommunications and the internet being more widely available in Cuba in ways that it hasn't been before. And over time, that chips away at this hermetically sealed society, and I believe offers the best prospect then of leading to greater freedom, greater self-determination on the part of the Cuban people. I think it'll happen in fits and starts. But through engagement, we have a better chance of bringing about change than we would have otherwise. Okay?
Do you have a goal for where you see Cuba being at the end of your presidency?
I think it'd be unrealistic for me to map out exactly where Cuba will be. But change is going to come to Cuba. It has to. They've got an economy that doesn't work. They've been reliant for years, first on subsidies from the Soviet Union, then on subsidies from Venezuela. Those can't be sustained. And the more the Cuban people see what's possible, the more interested they are going to be in change. But how societies change is country specific, it's culturally specific. It could happen fast, it could happen slower than I'd like, but it's going to happen, and I think this change of policy is going to advance that. Leslie Clark.
Thank you, President. I had a number of questions on Cuba as well.
Okay.
Appreciate that. I wanted to
Do
see
I have to write all these down? How many? A number sounded intimidating.
Quick as I can.
Okay.
I wanted to see if you got any assurances from the Cuban government that it would not revert to the same sort of sabotage the deal as it has in the past when past presidents have made similar overtures to the government.
Meaning, be specific, what do you mean?
When the Clinton administration made some overtures, they shot down planes, they sort of had this pattern of doing provocative
Okay. So
provocative
just
events.
general provocative activity.
Provocative activities
All right.
anytime the U.S. has sort of reached out a hand to them.
Okay.
I wanted to see what is your knowledge of whether Fidel Castro, did he have any role in the talks? Did you talk, when you talked to President Castro, Raul Castro, did Fidel Castro's name come up, or did you ask about him? How's he doing? People haven't seen him in a while. Given the deep opposition from some Republicans in Congress to lifting the embargo, to an embassy, to any of the changes that you're doing, are you going to personally get involved in terms of talking to them about efforts that they want to do to block money on a new embassy.
All right, Leslie, I think I'm going to cut you off here. This is taking up a lot of time.
Okay, all right.
All right.
Now-
So, with respect to sabotage, I mean, my understanding of the history, for example, the plane being shot down, it's not clear that that was the Cuban government purposely trying to undermine overtures by the Clinton administration. It was a tragic circumstance that ended up collapsing talks that had begun to take place. I haven't seen a historical record that suggests that they shot the plane down specifically in order to undermine overtures by the Clinton government. I think it is not precedented for the President of the United States and the President of Cuba to make an announcement at the same time that they are moving towards normalizing relations. So there hasn't been anything like this in the past. That doesn't mean that over the next 2 years we can't anticipate them taking certain actions that we may end up finding deeply troubling, either inside of Cuba or with respect to their foreign policy. And that could put significant strains on the relationship. But that's true of a lot of countries out there where we have an embassy. And the whole point of normalizing relations is that it gives us a greater opportunity to have influence with that government than not. So I would be surprised if the Cuban government purposely tries to undermine what is now effectively its own policy. I wouldn't be surprised if they take, at any given time, actions that we think are a problem. And we will be in a position to respond to whatever actions they take, the same way we do with a whole range of countries around the world when they do things we think are wrong. But the point is that we will be in a better position, I think, to actually have some influence. And there may be carrots as well as sticks that we can then apply. The only way that Fidel's name came up, I think I may have mentioned this in the David Muir article interview that I did, was I delivered a fairly lengthy statement at the front end about how we're looking forward to a new future in the relationship between our two countries, but that we are going to continue to press on issues of democracy and human rights, which we think are important. My opening remarks probably took about 15 minutes, which on the phone is a pretty long time. And at the end of that, he said, Mr. President, you're still a young man. Perhaps you have the opportunity. At the end of my remarks, I apologized for taking such a long time, but I wanted to make sure that before we engaged in the conversation that he was very clear about where I stood. He said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Mr. President. You're still a young man, and you have still a chance to break Fidel's record. He once spoke 7 hours straight." And then President Castro proceeded to deliver his own preliminary remarks that lasted at least twice as long as mine. And then I was able to say, obviously, it runs in the family. But that was the only discussion of Fidel Castro that we had. I sort of forgot all the other questions.
I have a few more. How personally involved are you going to get in?
Well, with respect to Congress, we cannot unilaterally bring down the embargo. That's codified in the Libertad Act. And what I do think is going to happen, though, is there's going to be a process where Congress digests it. There are bipartisan supporters of our new approach. There are bipartisan detractors of this new approach. People will see how the actions we take unfold. And I think there's going to be a healthy debate inside of Congress. And I will certainly weigh in. I think that ultimately we need to go ahead and pull down the embargo, which I think has been self-defeating.